Doobie-da-ba-ba-ba. 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 Sperm Sisters.
This is a story about sisters, just not the kind that you're expecting.
3 years ago, we were strangers, living separate lives.
Now we know we're biological sisters, connected by the same sperm donor.
And that's just the beginning.
This podcast dives headfirst into the how, the why, and the uncomfortable questions no one seems to want to answer.
Uncovering secrets the medical world would rather keep buried. How many donor-conceived people are there really?
No one can give a straight answer. Not the clinics, not the system, no one.
So, how many siblings could be walking past us every day without a clue?
It's messy, it's shocking. At times, it's almost impossible to believe.
And somehow, it's also really funny.
Come with us as we dig deeper, ask the uncomfortable questions, and laugh our way through the chaos of discovering who we really are and just how many of us there might be.
Coming up on this week's episode of Sperm Sisters.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sperm Sisters. Now, today's guest is someone very special to us. Harriet Hall first discovered her passion for medical ethics while studying law, a spark that led her to complete a master's in the subject at King's College London. Harriet would be the first to tell you that she isn't an expert, but she has a particular fascination with the legal and ethical questions surrounding assisted reproduction and abortion. As medical technologies continue to advance, these areas raise incredibly complex questions about competing interests, societal values, and even when life begins, issues that have profound consequences for the people at the centre of them. Professionally, Harriet has spent her career in the charity sector, tackling some of the healthcare's biggest challenges. She's passionate about policy, people, and problem solving, which makes her the perfect person to join us for today's conversation. And finally, perhaps her greatest qualification of all is that she's been my trusted friend and confidant for over 20 years. And it is my greatest pleasure to welcome her to today's episode. Harriet, welcome to Sperm Sisters.
Thank you.
Woo, woo, woo.
So excited about this. Before we kick off, can I put one thing on the record?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tash was popular in sixth form.
Right. I didn't believe it.
No, it's not. It's false. It's false.
I'm not letting you edit that out.
I was like one of those people that knew everyone, but didn't really form great relationships.
Not true. Everyone loves Tash and
Yeah.
still does. Yeah.
How could they not after the umbrella dance as well?
Anyway,
Well,
that's
look.
not why we're here, is it?
That's not why we are here.
We're here to learn things.
Might be good to kind of start with the bigger picture, Harriet, if you don't mind, and ask you what you think are some of the biggest ethical questions around sperm donation that most people never stop to think about.
I have a few. I think listening to all of your wonderful episodes, you've already hit on quite a lot of the core ones. But when you luckily very kindly gave me this question beforehand so I could have a little think. And also I went back and had a look at what you'd all been discussing, so I didn't just say all the obvious ones. I think there are probably 4, so I couldn't choose just one. What comes next? What can we actually learn from sperm donation so that whatever the next big thing in fertility treatments, we don't make the same mistakes that we have from the past? Fertility clinic regulation and the rise of add-ons. Do we think that everyone should have a right to fertility on the NHS? Donor availability and screening. What do you think should and shouldn't be screened for? I noticed in one of the episodes you made a really interesting point about screening out for the anxiety. But if you did, maybe you guys wouldn't be here. So what are those kind of levels that we think are relevant or not? And then, have I done 4? No, that's the other one. Sorry, 4. What do we think about the use of dead donors' gametes in sperm donation? So just some light-hearted ones to kick us off.
Shall we start with death? But
Yeah.
those are all actually incredible. I want to go through all of them.
what comes next? So I thought I'd pose a question to you guys first. In all the research that you've done, what do you think is the next big thing in sperm donation?
I think international regulation has to be one of them, because following the episode that we recorded last week with our friend in Australia, Down Under, her story is wild, but I think international regulation for sure is something for me that was never something I had considered prior to doing this podcast, but it's now something that I think is cropping up in a lot of our episodes. Whether we mean to bring it up or not, it seems to always come through as a theme.
Yeah.
Helen?
Sorry,
Gemma.
Totally. I think the main thing is international record keeping for sure, or just countries tallying up with each other. But also, this isn't like a future thing, but what I found interesting was finding out that people who did hit the post 1991 regulations, and they were then able to access identifying information, of which it wasn't really identifying. I didn't realize that the parents had to access that on their behalf. So I think then there'll be so many people, even post 91, who still have no idea that they're donor conceived, and whether there should be something going back through all of those records, like at least letters sent just acknowledging it to people. But obviously I don't think that would ever happen, but that's something I think should happen.
Gemma?
I hate to be a Debbie Downer. I don't think they will ever create an international donor list. I don't think a law will ever be passed that everyone around the world has to know. I think what's more likely going to happen is sperm donation and the creation of human life will get more sophisticated, and people will be able to cherry pick features, personality traits, getting
Harriet's dying to say something.
This is what it's is it? I think that's more likely going to happen, because realistically, you make money on that. You lose money on the other bits, like letting people know, creating a donor list, like a register.
Yeah.
That's going to cost time and money. They're not going to do that. Why would they do that when they could make money by charging an insane amount?
Well, what do you think it is then, Harriet?
Well, first off, amazing responses. I wasn't quite thinking of international regulation, but that is in my list to come to a bit later. The retrospective elements of law, very interested in that. And again, is coming at a later point. But ding, 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 Gemma. I was thinking about what is the next step in terms of some of the technological developments. And although I didn't quite go down the gene editing area, I did think I'd bring to your attention in vitro gametogenesis.
What is
Do
that?
any of you know what that is?
No.
So, this is the development of gametes, which are eggs or sperms that can be developed outside the human body from either embryonic stem cells or reprogrammed adult cells like skin cells, which then can be used to form embryos, which mean we've already demonstrated this in animal models, and so it is about 7 years away, but it means that people that are same-sex couples or people with specific fertility issues might be able to use their own cells, edit them, and then create sperm and egg cells, which is really fascinating. But I thought that this brings out loads of the questions you guys have started to raise on identity. What does that mean? What does that mean as well from any kind of stigma and societal attitude perspective? I just thought it was a bit of an interesting one.
Yeah.
So sorry, just to clarify.
Throw a lot at you there.
So are you saying that in 7 years' time, people could literally just use skin cells in a science setting to create an egg or create sperm from the skin cells?
Yes.
I don't know what
Now,
I think
will
about
that actually happen? Probably not. I don't think we are, but it was in the Nuffield, Nuffield Council on Bioethics that they put out 7 years, which I think is incredibly ambitious. But it does pose questions about what should we be preparing for if we know that those kind of things are possible. But for those they wouldn't be donor conceived children.
That's
I don't know
the
what we
thing.
would call them.
Well, that's an entirely new.
They're not
ballgame.
donor.
Yeah.
So it's the end of donor conception children as we know it.
We're going to have to
And that's
change
the end of your podcast. Thanks for inviting me on. Bye.
What would they
Get a
even
new
call
brand.
that?
Get a new brand.
Rebrand.
What was the fancy term for that you
The
said?
fancy term, in vitro gametogenesis. And because I thought you might have lots of questions, and I have just thrown this on you, which is quite cruel, I've got 2 papers that I can send you afterwards that you can also link to if you'd like. That gives you a bit more detail on what that could mean, what some of the ethical implications are for it, so that you can dive into a bit more detail. But I just thought I'd raise that as a bit of a question in. There might be lots of different technological developments in the next few years that might shift how we think about sperm donation. But I think what the important point is where do we pull out our knowledge from now? Things like how we inform children about how they're conceived, what those technologies actually mean in the long run. Are we thinking about those children at this point, which isn't necessarily what we've done historically?
Oh my God.
So I managed to tie it back round, not just to throw in the fact that I did all the research on in vitro gametogenesis, went down a bit of a rabbit hole, and then went, oh, how am I gonna shoot on this? No, I'm joking.
I actually can't believe that. But that is definitely where it will be heading, because that's what a money spinner that will be. And there's not enough sperm donors anyway. That is why they're having to go international.
And that's going to stop all of this bullshit.
There is a point, though, in what you said a minute ago, Gemma, to bring it back round to that genetic testing. What if you had a predisposition to a genetic issue and you wanted to use somebody else? You might not need to go for their sperm or egg anymore. You might just want to use a cell. What does that mean for that kind of donation instead? And will it be actually regulated by the HFEA? At the moment, no, it would be a completely different piece of law. So I still think there would be the potential for donation. It's just even how we conceptualize and think about it might be a bit different. You're right, Tash.
I'm sorry. I just have so many questions.
I told you, we're not getting past question 1. Strap in. This is going to be a 3-hour episode. Fertility clinic regulation, which I know has come up on your podcast before, about just the offers that different clinics have and also the costs that vary between different clinics. So my question was around, do you think everyone should have a right to fertility services on the NHS? And if so, when we've got these kind of rise of add-ons and other bits like that, what should be the kind of minimum standard practice and some of the dangers around add-ons?
What are these add-ons exactly?
So in a lot of fertility clinics at the moment, they will show you the kind of standard approach. But even for intrauterine insemination, so IUI, which is what you guys predominantly talk about, they will do add-ons that include tests, drugs, equipment, alternative therapies, lab procedures, and surgical interventions. And even within those, although they claim to enhance pregnancy, mitigate risks of miscarriage, reduce time taken to get pregnant, the safety and efficacy is actually limited or lacking. There's not much evidence for those types of treatments. And so both the HFEA and the ESHRE, I don't know if you've come across ESHRE before.
What does that stand for?
That's the European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology, so the kind of European equivalent authority, have both done really interesting papers about treatment add-ons with limited evidence. And again, if you go on the HFEA, they've actually come up with a system to say to you, what does have evidence, what's limited, where is there none? Because, people were going through a really vulnerable time of their lives. And so to be told, here's some add-ons that will improve your chances or reduce your risks when they're not necessarily accurate seems just really wrong for me personally. And I know that for some healthcare practitioners, they will be well-meaning in this. They'll be listening to what their patients are asking them about what's available with other clinics, et cetera, et cetera. And they might actually feel like, oh, I have seen it work. I do want to do this. But until there's real evidence behind it, I feel like you are just, really getting someone at a vulnerable point and then really using that commercial interest to take as much money as you can. And I think you guys mentioned 6 cycles are recommended before you go to NHS treatment alone. So if you're getting all these add-ons every time, what does that start adding up to? So I just think that's an issue that we don't really spend time on when we think about what is information out there, what should we be doing? I mean, Gemma, you yourself, when you were looking at costs, it's so difficult to find out what even that basic cost, what you should be expecting as a minimum that when you get there and they start getting told about additional things, how are you going to be able to take what you essentially need against these add-ons? It just seems wrong.
Because it makes it sound like EasyJet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, baggage allowance.
Yeah. Like, do you get the luxury of pre-booking your seat, or do you buy the meal on the flight? You know, all that kind of stuff.
Wi-Fi.
I didn't even realise that there were all of these add-ons and like different packages. I thought that people turned up to clinics to get XYZ, what you needed to have a baby, like, rather than that just feeds into the whole thing of like, us being here today is because someone had a great business plan.
Totally. And preying on the vulnerability of people, because if you're in that situation, you're going to buy every add-on, aren't you? If you're desperate to have a family and a doctor's saying this is all available from a trusted source, you'd be like, oh, take the whole package. You'd buy the Wi-Fi, basically.
Yeah. And that parental guilt starts before you've even conceived having a baby, because I imagine you would feel guilty not getting on every single add-on. Each time you go in, you might say, I can't have that add-on this time. Next time, one less. And that's so demotivating when you're trying to get pregnant and to try and get into a positive headspace.
Don't you think it's really interesting that Harriet has said that the HFEA actually have a whole list of what has been proven to be of use to buy as an add-on? Because throughout the whole time of us doing this podcast, we had no idea that even existed. And that's such an important piece of information for anyone trying or going through fertility treatment. Yeah. Again, if we're proving that it's a business model, it's the fact that that's pretty buried information.
I will say I do feel a bit for the HFEA because they have a lot of plates to spin. And I also think there is personally, I think a bit more funding their way so that they can do some of these other elements would be really beneficial. Because if you're trying to regulate all the clinics or give out information and all these bits, you're probably going to look at the safety of the clinics and make that your priority, if you know what I mean.
What do you know what their funding status is, Harriet?
Excellent question. I do not know, but I will happily look that up and then ping you anything I find. In fact, that would be my pleasure.
Because what came out in the last month that the HFEA were like, after all of the online sperm donation stuff, they had to release a statement, didn't they? There wasn't anything on their website about buying sperm illegally.
There was some information on the legal ramifications about legal parenthood, because going through HFEA licensed clinics, you've always separated out that parenthood issue. But you're right. I do think there is an information sharing opportunity for the HFEA to try and get this information more mainstream that maybe they don't have the resources to do at the moment. You will realise during this conversation, I am a bit of a HFEA fangirl, because what they are trying to do, even though it has its issues, I will agree, I do think that they are trying their hardest to deal with some really complex stuff. And although they don't get the balance right, they are trying to listen and learn. And I think it's really interesting regulation. And although I know you've had discussions with other people, I still maintain it is quite forward thinking when you take the whole of human fertilization and embryology together. I do understand how it probably misses parts, particularly from different, where different interests collide. But that's just me fangirling over the HFEA for a second. Sorry.
Okay.
I don't think Gemma agrees.
Yeah, Gemma hates them.
I hate them.
Yeah, I hate them.
But I think it's a two-way street, isn't it? The HFEA are doing good things as well, but they also do need to listen to donor conceived people, and they do need to make sure that they're embedded in their regulatory framework so that you're getting opinions, perspectives, the same that they should have clinicians input, the same that they should have, people that have fertility issues. All of those views should be represented so that when you come to make the legislation, it is fit for purpose. Lived experience makes legislation better.
Exactly.
And, yeah,
you took the words right out of my mouth.
From from your research, Harriet, who do you think then, just on a side note of being a fangirl of the HFEA, who do you think that they are listening to the most? Is it the clinicians? Is it prospective parents? Or is it the products, if you will?
I think it's been a really big journey. And I think it starts from the kind of, even before the HFEA, I think that originally when you were looking at all assisted reproduction technologies, doctors and scientists were like, the problem is people can't have a child. And so the outcome they were looking for was healthy child. I don't think they, rightly or wrongly, well, wrongly, but I don't think they were thinking of the future life and any of the necessarily ethical questions, because I think they were running on the basis that a life is better than no life. And so if you've produced a life, like, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like, the alternative is the person doesn't exist. So I think from their perspective, they were like, existence is better than non-existence. So let's just crack on with that. And I don't think it necessarily came from bad intentions. I think it was also, you've got to remember that a lot of fertility is around kind of female health, which often doesn't get all of the research, all of the funding, all of the interest that it deserves. And so again, I think in some ways it was pioneering to be like, people want to start a family. We want to pioneer some technology in order to get them there. Let's get people pregnant. I think then when you start to get towards the HFA, you see that you've got a group of people now that have come of age and are starting to push for regulation, because they're like, well, what actually does come next? Like, I want to know some information, or I don't think this has been treated particularly sensitively. I don't think the guidance has been accurate. And so I think by the time you get to the 90s, if you think about it, first kind was 1978, I think I'm right in saying. I know it was a lot longer before that. You're looking at 1940s for AID. But I think once you get to that point, you've got enough of a groundswell of people being like, well, no, actually, we need this. And I think probably the balance was still researchers and scientists. And then when you get the amendments in 2005, it's because we've moved away from this like paternalistic medical model, and we're starting to think through more to that psychosocial model, which is, what is the well-being? How are we balancing the interests of everyone involved? How are we keeping people safe and thinking about them holistically as a person? I don't think that that's unique to the HFEA. I think a lot of our views on medicine historically have been paternalistic, and so the regulation has been paternalistic. I think now we're starting to think, no, counselling is essential. Information, even without genetic testing, there is still a need for people to know certain pieces of information. So how do we do that in the best way? And even in the 1990s, I know it genuinely wasn't done particularly well, but I think some of that anonymous information was an attempt, and it was only once they'd implemented it that they realised that it wasn't quite fulfilling the need. So again, you're seeing, even now they're talking about another amendment to the law. And sorry, you've got me on my bandwagon. Another thing to say is,
I love it.
Yeah, so you're really fucking clever as well.
It's actually really complicated to change the law around the HFEA, because slightly aside from the donor sperm, it's also looking at the research that you can do on an embryo. And there's a lot of debates about, when does life begin? So when you start to unpick some of that, you can get a lot of lobbying from people that don't want research in this area, have different views about what a family should look like, can start to lobby. And it can be quite tricky to amend this legislation unless you've got really good, because it's very technical information, unless you've got really good buy-in and support from Parliament and the House of Lords. Otherwise, it can get quite tricky. So at the moment, you can only have an embryo for 14 days, then it has to be destroyed for research purposes. But that in and of itself is very controversial and highly debated, because it does limit your ability to do certain pieces of research. But an embryo develops something called the primitive streak at around 14 days, and that's when it's viewed as being unethical to continue any research on it. But that also explains why we have some gaps in knowledge between initial fertilization, which we're relatively high up on, but then that gap from 14 days onwards where we've got less research and capabilities around what happens to an embryo at that point.
This just reminds me of when you and I had a conversation fairly recently in relation to some facts that we had previously spoken about in an earlier episode about the length of time that sperm can be stored for. And I think that we had said that that would be 55 years. So then we went on to have a conversation about, oh gosh, well, imagine if in, 50 years time, we discover that we've got our half sibling who's 3. or, 4. And you had some really interesting points to make on that, Harriet. And I wonder if you could share them with us now.
Yeah, so I think it's important when we're analysing the HFEA Act that it's not in isolation, because it's also looking at the storage of eggs, sperm and embryos. And so originally you could only store them for 10 years, but particularly younger people freezing eggs, freezing sperm, freezing embryos were struggling with that time period. And although you might consider 55 quite high, there are some pretty interesting justifications for it. The first is that sometimes younger people can be experiencing things like cancer treatment, and if they have hit puberty, they can then freeze their eggs and sperm. And although I agree with you that 55 years is quite a long time, if you're someone in that specific situation, it does give you an element of choice about when you utilize that. And also, men can have children up to that point, even depending on when you when you have that treatment. So I think there is some rationale to that. There's also other things that people consider. People are freezing much earlier, although obviously 55 is still quite a big limit. The purpose was to try and ensure equality so that you weren't penalising women with like a shorter amount, or, you're trying to find a limit that suited everybody's needs. People undergoing gender reassignment surgery that may still want to conceive, obviously, again, skewing on the younger side demographic, again, as long as they've hit puberty, giving them the maximum options so that they would be comparable to other people. Those at risk of injury or death who wish for their partner to use their sperm, eggs or embryo after death gives them more ability to grieve and then have that option without putting such strict time limits on it. And armed forces as well. If you're going into deployment, particularly if you're young and you're worried about injury, you can do that then as well, which again just gives you a longer time period to decide about what choices you want to make in your family. I will say that there are also less availability of gametes from people of Black or minority ethnic groups. So when they were reviewing this, they did think that an extended time period actually gave a greater chance from people with a smaller pool to have some options compared to the majority, which again, I do understand that if you're thinking about from the donor sibling perspective, does feel quite a long time. But I would also point out that in practicality, most are used within the first few years. Like they've looked into this, and donors themselves can actually reduce that time limit on the forms. And I've also downloaded the forms so that you can see them and see what they're asked for and what they can get information on. They can say if they don't want the donation to go on beyond a certain time limit. So it also, 55 years might seem quite high, but I actually think when you think about all the different circumstances, it's erring on the side of caution to allow the maximum number of people that might want to use their gametes the opportunity to do so. But I do understand from a sibling perspective and just donor sperm, but I think it's also good for clinics to only have one set of dates to be accountable for, because if you start putting different time limits for different situations, you can get into a bit of a tricky situation where people's gametes might be being destroyed because they were mislabeled, or those kind of clerical errors, where actually if you've got one solid time limit, it is more efficient, I think, for clinics to track. But happy to take any questions or considerations around that. Go on, Gemma.
Do you think, sorry, I've got 2 questions.
Yeah.
First question is, do you think that our donor, he donated in the late 80s, do you think that his sperm would still be in circulation today?
I don't think I can say either way, because I don't know. I am very much talking about the UK. I don't know if he donated outside of the UK where it's not quite.
Just in London. Yeah.
I don't know. In all honesty, I have no idea. I think it's unlikely, but it might be. Oh, sorry, that was the other thing. One other quick thing. It's also because of people wanting to use the same donor for 2 siblings. So they've tried to maximise the amount of time that you can do that for, again, beyond the 10-year limit, because they felt that was unfair. Sorry, okay. I probably should have said that earlier.
I still don't, but you would never, but in life, you wouldn't get someone with a sibling who was 30 years younger than them.
I do agree, but I think... Oh, sorry, go on.
Unless you're Mick Jagger. Well, who's Del Boy? Del Boy's still cracking them out. What's his name? David something.
Jason?
David Jason.
Is he really? I didn't know that.
My God, yes. He's prolific. Oh, boy. Hang on.
Oh, Sorry,
So-
Gemma, I also interrupted your second question.
Yeah, what's your second question? Is it about that one?
My
Sorry.
second question is, right, if you have a pot of sperm on the shelf that is 10 years old and you have a pot of sperm on the shelf that's 30 years old, is it cheaper to buy the 30-year-old sperm?
I don't
So
know,
do
but
you
I don't
think that
think you're
it
allowed
might
to do
be
that.
a bit more of an appealing financial decision if you buy the cheaper, it might be cheaper, like the older sperm?
I again would have to look it up before I say anything certainly, but I don't think so. But I would have to look it up because I think that you're not supposed to. Actually, do you know what? I'm not going to say anything in case I guess and get it wrong. I'll go and look it up and come back to you.
Just maybe it's my cynical view because I feel so burnt by the whole process that I wouldn't be surprised if they had some kind of like bog off deal. You know, buy one, get one free on the older sperm because they need to clear the shelf at the end of the spermy season.
There is a demand that outpaces the need at the moment. So I think it's difficult. Part of me thinks that actually 55 years, unless you are one of those people I mentioned that are storing it for personal use.
Yeah.
Which I do think does make sense. I think in reality, in donation, it's just not sitting on the shelf that long.
If we're using David Jason as a case study, just
as we always should.
Quite right. What I found on Google is that he has an older daughter who's age 55 and a younger daughter who's 25, which is only 30 years then, isn't it? And that's like everyone was shocked. That made national news with how old he was when he had his youngest daughter then. So, but that's still only 30 years. So I don't get why you would need another 40.
Again, I think it's skewed that way, not for donors of sperm. I think it's skewed that way for people that, particularly teens, that are undergoing medical treatment that might want it later in life. And I think 55 years, although it might seem really advanced, there are also technological developments about how you can store like people prepubescent children's gametes if they're undergoing things like cancer treatment for them to have reproductive choices when they get older.
You're right, but I now feel like a knob.
Why? What? That wasn't intended.
But now I've thought about it, I'm like, yeah, that is fair. Do you think that's why potentially there's all this chat about how even in 7 years you could create life just from a skin cell? The fact that there's such a dwindling population as well. Do you think that they'll try and like put more funding into that because they're so desperate for people to have children?
I think the drive is more from that treatment perspective. So it's rather than relying on donations, it's what can we do to solve the infertility of the individual. I think that's the driver, but I do think there are commercial interests within that as well, to be honest. You probably will have more people that would want their own genetic child. I'm saying that's an assumption, but you may have more people that are more prepared to do that and think, or you might have some people that are put off by the idea of donor gametes and look at things like adoption instead, because there are other pathways as well, or, so it might be that I think the driver isn't necessarily, and especially not for the NHS. I don't think the NHS is sat there thinking we can make loads of money out of this. I think it's more the researchers thinking about how do we cure infertility, and then commercial interests step into that piece because of the resource issue. So a commercial interest will be, we know people really desperately want to have children. We can make lots of money off this. We know that the NHS has limited resources, so we can step in and then charge a fortune. And that's where the commercial interest comes in, I think.
Do you think you're also anticipating a Handmaid's Tale scenario?
I love a bit of dystopian fiction. I'm always anticipating a...
Samesies, because I bet that's easier than...
Don't get me started on surrogacy law, Gemma.
I want to now.
It's a different podcast.
Yeah, Because we've had Surrogacy UK get in touch with us and say that they want to come onto the podcast.
You should. It's really interesting. Can I tell you a little fact?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you use a surrogate, who gets put on the birth certificate?
Not the surrogate. The
Is it
surrogate.
the surrogate?
Yeah, the surrogate, because in the UK, the person that births the child is the person that's legally put on as the mother. And then you have to apply for a parental order in order to amend it.
What the fuck? How long can that take?
I do not know. My fact has run out.
We went to go and get my daughter a birth certificate. And do you know what I think is so wild? When you're in there, they asked Jack, said, like, obviously I'm on the birth certificate because I gave birth to her. But they specifically asked Jack, so are you sure you want to go ahead with this? Because once your name is on here, you are legally responsible for the child. But if you don't want to be put on it, this is the time to not be put on it. In not so many words, basically. And Jack and I were like wetting ourselves afterwards because I was like, can you imagine if we'd sat there and Jack's like, actually, I don't want to be on it at all. I don't want any legal responsibility. But like the woman doesn't get asked that, obviously. I just think that was crazy in this day and age to be like, are you sure you want to?
Not another one.
No.
Well, this comes back to your question on genetic parentage, because you could just have a DNA test there and then decide whether he was or wasn't the father during that process if you really wanted to, for everyone.
Yeah.
If you have a right to know your genetic origins.
Which I think you do, personally.
I think you do.
Because
Tasha?
Yeah, I think yes, I think so.
I feel like someone's holding a gun to your head for you to say yes.
You don't have to agree with us, Nat. We'll still be sisters.
No, I do. I think I don't feel quite as passionately about it as perhaps you both do, but I do feel that it's important to, like, I think, like, I don't feel different having, like, now known that I'm not half Polish or Hungarian and that I'm actually half Irish?
Welsh.
Yeah.
Welsh
and Irish, yeah.
Welsh Irish. I don't feel any different, but it has been very, very, it's nice. Like, I found it really interesting. And do you see where I'm going with this? Like, I don't think that it has like altered me as a person though. What's altered me is like knowing you two.
Yeah. This is really interesting because this comes up a lot in the literature. And a lot of the research around it often says that it just depends on the value that you place on genetics, really, as to where you land on that spectrum. And although there is the Universal Declaration. Scrolling. What's it called? I know this.
Do you want me to talk about David Jason while you're looking?
If in doubt, talk about David Jason. The only case study we need.
I'd be
Happens
interested
to be the only. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Yeah, it legally is established, and that is why you've got retrospective legislation happening in places like Victoria, only because it was put into the United Nations Convention on Rights of the Child. But I would argue that it's actually, as a right, it's quite difficult to enforce. And actually, you're uniquely privileged if you have gone through something like donation to find this information out, because I could ask my mum, but she doesn't have to tell me.
God bless.
I mean, we took DNA tests. That was how we found out. Did all of our digging. But like, I think mine isn't like hankering to know exactly the town, location, postcode of where we're from. It's the principle of it. And it's someone deciding for someone else whether they have the right to know or not. That's my beef with it.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
Gets to decide, and I'm just about to let my golden retriever in. But what I will say before Albus comes in is, I knew before the DNA test and doing this podcast, I knew more about Albus's heritage through his Kennel Club Crufts line than I did about my own. And I think that is what really pisses me off, because how the fuck do I know more about a dog?
Oh, can I ask you the ethical conundrum that some ethicists placed on this, which I think even whether you agree or disagree with it, it'll be interesting. If you feel that there is a right to your genetic origin, do you think there should be a registration of everyone that has ever had a one-night stand?
Ooh.
Yeah, should people that have a one-night stand have to register on the basis that if that does result in a child, they have access to the other person's information? And then and say 3 months after, if there's no pregnancy, you can delete that.
God, what an awkward conversation in the morning before the walk
But they're
of
also
shame.
the same people messaging these people saying, sorry, I've just tested positive for gonorrhea. So
Yeah,
they
but
can
then
have
that's
that
a
chat.
different. But then that's just everybody registering everybody you've ever slept with. Do you know
The
what,
reason for the test is basically how onerous do you think it should be on people to report that information? I do agree with you. Everyone should have a right to know, but actually in practice, there will be some people that won't know. So it's hard to enforce a right that not everybody would be able to have access to. And so what I'm saying is, in some ways, you are in a better position to find out that information than some other people. And that's not a criticism. That's just to test for how onerous you think those kind of systems should be.
Maybe it
Go on,
should
Helen.
be when someone's given birth and they say, David Jason is the father.
Do you need to go and talk to your partner?
David! Should it be then that when someone gives birth, actually, I've already decided in my head that it shouldn't be this, but I'm just going to pose the question anyway, that the person who's given birth needs to do a DNA test on who they're saying is the father, to confirm that that is the truth or not. So at least it can't be a lie.
Would there be any situations where you think that would be unethical? Because there are two that jump out to me straight away.
Go on. What are your ones that jump out?
Well, if you were conceived, and this was like trigger warning, I'm going to go into.
I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
If you were conceived by incest or rape, because then I would argue that actually there's like a stronger set of criteria that you need in order to inform somebody of that situation. And so again, and even just considerations about when you would find out that information, how, all of these things. So again, I do agree with you. I think that people do have a right to know their genetic origins, but I do think there's flexibility. And I think the key to all of this is actually choice. And it's the individual should have a place they can go to find this out. But equally, nobody should be dictating that you must know these things. If you don't want to know, I think you also should have a right to be like, it's great that I know that information is available, but I don't want anything to do with it. I'm happy to continue on as I was. And I think that kind of covers all of your perspectives as well. I think it's knowing where to go to get information if you want or need it, that there are registers out there, but not being forced either way down a path that you're not prepared to do.
Because I also think this sort of makes us think about knowing medical information, for instance, of that of a donor. And actually, Harriet, just from everything you've just said, I think previous conversations that the three of us have had, we've been like, well, yeah, we should absolutely know the medical history of donors. But actually, with everything that you've just said, Harriet, not everybody wants to know the history, like their medical history, because some people don't want to live a life through anxiety of knowing that, they may be they may have a predisposition of a certain medical issue or a cancer or, a mental health problem. I think there is actually that to take into consideration as well, if I'm playing like devil's advocate.
Can I turn my light on?
No.
Yeah.
No. I think there might be some continuity issues in this episode.
Well, actually, though,
day and night.
I think because all of this is so day and night. What's us turning some? Because I personally think all of this has been really interesting. I think this should be a two-parter job anyway.
100%.
So one of me in the dark, one of me in the light.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I also would love to get you on, Harriet, for you to basically tell us the rights and wrongs of things that like we've said before, or in like a legal point, be like, you guys have got to rein that bit in, or like, you got to be careful saying that. And
no, I think it's really interesting because, like I said earlier, you need multiple perspectives, and the lived experience is so essential to how we think about all of this stuff. So I don't think there is any right or wrong. I'd also say ethics. There isn't right or wrong. There's like all the societal, cultural norms. There's what we know now. There's loads. So I don't think there's right or wrong. Although if you have said anything legally incorrect, I will let you know.
oh God.
David Jason Sues is not on me.
Harriet, thank you so much.